Power doesn't always announce itself with sirens or gunfire. Sometimes, it sits quietly in a locked room, waiting to see who blinks first. On a rain-soaked weeknight, one waitress learned that silence can be deadlier than screams, and she chose not to flinch. Victor Moretti ruled the city's criminal underground the way an accountant balances books, cold, precise, and without sentiment. He didn't rely on shouting or theatrics. His reputation alone did the work for him. And on a damp Thursday evening in late autumn, inside the private VIP suite of a nightclub called the Black Halo, he decided to conduct business the old-fashioned way, with a glass of water and a loaded handgun. His most feared enforcers stood rigid around the room, sweat darkening the collars of their tailored jackets. But the youngest person present, a 24-year-old server named Emily Carter, didn't tremble. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She did something far worse. She stayed calm. That single, unshaken moment would quietly ignite a conflict that would ripple through the city for years. This is the story of the waitress who refused to react. The Black Halo wasn't just another nightclub. It was a monument to excess, soft velvet walls, brass railings polished daily, and security so tight it felt more like a bunker than a bar. It sat near the bend of the river, its reflection rippling in the dark water like a warning sign. To regular patrons, it was where executives and politicians burned cash under low lights. To the police, it was a dead zone, where investigations stalled and witnesses forgot details. And to Emily Carter, it was the only place where tips were generous enough to keep her grandmother's medical treatments paid for each month. Emily was 24, with sun-blonde hair usually tied back tight and eyes sharpened by long nights and hard responsibility. She didn't believe in rescues or lucky breaks. She believed in preparation. She memorized exits. She followed rules. And at the Black Halo, the most important rule was simple. See everything. Say nothing. At 11:30 p.m., the club's main floor pulsed with bass so heavy it rattled glassware. But above it all, separated by thick soundproof panels, the VIP level was unnervingly quiet. "Private table's yours tonight," muttered Dale, the floor supervisor, shoving a tray into Emily's hands. His face was pale, his fingers damp. "Don't mess this up." "He's already irritated." Emily didn't ask who he was. Victor V. Moretti didn't come to clubs to relax. He came to solve problems that couldn't exist on recorded phone calls. "I'll take care of it," Emily replied evenly, tightening her grip on the tray as she walked toward the private doors. Inside the suite, the air felt heavy, expensive cologne, cigar smoke, and something sharper underneath. Fear. 6 men occupied the room. 5 stood near the walls, hands close to their jackets. 1 sat comfortably in a leather chair. Victor Moretti looked more like a corporate executive than a crime boss. Clean lines. Dark suit. Calm posture. But his eyes were wrong, flat, calculating, utterly uninterested in mercy. He was watching a man on his knees. Emily recognized him instantly. Tommy Reyes, a small-time runner. His face was blotchy, tears streaking through the grime. "I didn't talk," Tommy sobbed. "I swear I didn't say anything. Please." Emily stopped several steps away. Every instinct screamed to turn around. But she knew better. Turning your back was worse than staying. She walked forward, heels tapping softly against the marble floor. Each sound echoed like a countdown. One of the guards, a thick-necked man with a jagged scar over his eye, stepped in front of her. "Not now. Leave." Victor raised a single finger. The guard froze. "Let her work," Victor said calmly. Emily met Victor's gaze without hesitation. "I'm thirsty," he added. She didn't look at the kneeling man. She didn't glance at the weapons. She focused only on the request. "Still was sparkling, sir?" she asked. The question N landed like a slap. A man was begging for his life, and she was discussing water. Victor's lips twitched, just barely. "Still," he replied. 3 ice cubes. Emily nodded. Of course. She turned her back to him and walked to the corner bar. Her hands were steady as she lifted the tongs. 3 cubes. No more. No less. She poured the water carefully into a crystal glass and placed it on the tray. When she turned around, Victor held a pistol, black, matte, unadorned, aimed at Tommy's head. Last chance, Victor said quietly. I swear, Tommy cried. The gunshot shattered the room. The sound bounced violently off the walls. Tommy collapsed where he knelt. Most people would have screamed. Most people would have dropped the tray. Emily didn't. She stepped forward, carefully moving around the body as if navigating clutter, and placed the glass on the coaster beside Victor's hand. Your water, she said calmly. Can I get you anything else? Victor stared at her. Not the body. Not the gun. Her. For the first time that night, something close to surprise crossed his face. He lifted the glass, took a slow sip, and never broke eye contact. You didn't flinch, he observed. I'm working, Emily replied. That's all. Victor waved a hand. Handle this, he said to the guards. Then he leaned back, studying her like a problem that didn't fit the equation. What's your name? Emily. He repeated it thoughtfully. You're not afraid of me. She answered without hesitation. Fear doesn't pay my bills. Victor laughed, short, dry, humorless. Leave, he said. Before I change my mind. Emily nodded once and walked out. She didn't run. She made it to the staff locker room before her legs finally failed her. She slid down the tiled wall, gasping for air, palms pressed flat against the cold floor as her body caught up with what her mind had refused to show. She had survived. But somewhere in that silent room, Victor Moretti had just chosen his next obsession. She didn't stop shaking until... She locked her apartment door behind her. She was alive. Technically safe. But deep down, she didn't feel like she had won anything. What Sarah didn't understand yet was that surviving hadn't meant passing the test. It meant she'd failed it, by refusing to break. And men like Luca Vieri hated unfinished puzzles. 3 days slipped by. Sarah tried to convince herself that what happened on Tuesday night hadn't been real. That the gun, the blood on the floor, the way the room went silent afterward, all of it had been some stress-induced hallucination. So she buried herself in routine. Morning classes at the Nursing Institute. Afternoon sleep with the blinds drawn. Night shifts at the Black Halo, carrying drinks through dim lights and loud music like nothing had changed. She avoided the news entirely. She couldn't risk seeing a headline about a body pulled from the river. Because if she did, then she'd have to admit that none of it had been imagined. Friday night arrived too fast. The club was packed wall to wall, louder than usual. A bachelor party had taken over half the bar, suits loosened, ties hanging crooked, men shouting over one another as if volume could drown out their own desperation. The air smelled like cheap cologne, spilled liquor, and bad decisions. Sarah was balancing a tray of tequila shots when Evan, the floor manager, grabbed her wrist. His grip was tight. His face was pale. VIP upstairs, he muttered. He asked for you. Personally. Her stomach dropped. Who, she asked, already knowing the answer. Vieri, Evan said quietly. He brought half the East Side with him. You need to go. Now. Sarah inhaled slowly. Deep. Controlled. She adjusted her apron, steadied her hands, and headed for the staircase. I'm just a waitress, she told herself. Act like one, and you stay alive. The private suite felt different this time. It wasn't cold. It wasn't quiet. It was celebratory. At least by criminal standards. Music played softly from hidden speakers. Bottles of expensive champagne littered the glass tables. Women in designer dresses lounged against leather sofas, laughing too loudly, watching everything with sharp, calculating eyes. At the center of it all sat Luca Vieri. relaxed, bored. He flicked the gold lighter open and shut, over and over again. Click. Clink. Click. When Sarah stepped inside, the conversations died instantly. Every eye turned to her. Men she recognized from Tuesday night, Rafe, a thin-smiled snake named Cal, and an older advisor everyone called Old Nico, studied her like she was an exhibit. Sarah, Luca said casually, not bothering to look up. You're late. I have other tables, she replied evenly, setting down clean glasses. Not tonight. He finally raised his eyes. Tonight, you're mine. He gestured to the empty seat beside him. Sit. I'm not allowed to sit with guests, Sarah said. House rules. Luca smiled faintly. I own the building. I own the rules. Sit. She hesitated, then perched on the edge of the sofa, leaving space between them. Everyone, Luca announced, his voice slicing through the room, this is the girl I told you about. The one who didn't flinch. A few of the men chuckled. One of the women, a brunette with razor-sharp eyeliner, glared at Sarah like she wanted to peel her alive. She looks fragile, Rafe sneered. Like a strong wind could knock her down. Let's find out, Luca said. He reached into his jacket. The revolver hit the table with a dull, heavy sound. He opened the chamber, spilled the bullets across the glass, then selected one. Slowly, deliberately, he slid it back in and spun the cylinder. Click. The room froze. Even the music downstairs felt distant, a low, pulsing heartbeat beneath the floor. Here's the game, Luca said, pushing the gun toward Sarah. It stopped, the barrel aimed directly at her chest. You want a tip tonight? Pick it up. Aim at the wall. Pull the trigger. He smiled thinly. If it clicks, you walk out with $8 grand. If it doesn't. He shrugged. I'll cover the funeral. Sarah stared at the gun. This wasn't about luck. It was about obedience. And if I refuse, she asked quietly. Then you walk out and never work in this city again, Luca replied calmly. Not here. Not anywhere. I'll make sure of it. Sarah thought about her grandmother. The dialysis bills. Nearly $4,000 a month. 2 payments already overdue. If she lost this job, her grandmother wouldn't make it. She met Luca's gaze. He wasn't angry. He wasn't cruel. He was curious. He wanted to see her snap. Sarah picked up the revolver. It was heavier than she expected. Cold. Solid. Her hand shook, just once, before steadying. She didn't aim at the wall. She stood, crossed the space between them, and pressed the barrel directly against Luca Vieri's forehead. The room erupted. Don't move! Rafe shouted, drawing his gun. 3 weapons were instantly trained on her skull. But Luca didn't blink. He stared up at her, the metal pressing into his skin. Slowly, dangerously, he smiled. You're insane, he whispered. You know that? You said pull the trigger, Sarah replied. Her voice trembled, just enough to betray the adrenaline tearing through her veins. You never said where I had to aim. Silence stretched tight. If I'm gambling my life, she continued, I'm not playing alone. Rafe's finger whitened on the trigger. One word from Luca and she would disappear forever. Put the guns down, Luca said calmly. She's holding a gun to your head. Rafe snapped. I said, Luca roared, put them down. Slowly, reluctantly, the weapons lowered. Luca never broke eye contact. Go on, he said softly. Pull it. Let's see who fate favors tonight. Sarah's finger tightened. 1 and 6. Click. The hammer fell on empty metal. She exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and lowered the gun, placing it gently back on the table. That's 8,000, she said. Cash. Luca stared at her. Then he laughed. a real lot. Ugh. Loud. Unrestrained. He pulled out a thick roll of bills and tossed it onto the table. "Make it 15, he said. "And get her a drink." He leaned closer, eyes dark and possessive. "She's not staff anymore." He smiled at Sarah. "You passed," he said. "Now the real work begins." Sarah took the money. She knew she should run. She knew she had just stepped into something she'd never escape. And for the first time since Tuesday night, she realized the test hadn't been about courage at all. It had been about ownership. She had walked straight into the lion's den and slapped the lion across the face. But as her eyes locked with Matteo DeLuca, something far more terrifying clicked into place. She wasn't just afraid. She was alive. And Matteo knew it. The money sat in the center of Elena Carter's kitchen table like it might start glowing at any second. $10,000 in $100 bills, bound tight with a cracked rubber band. It was enough to cover 3 full months of her grandmother's dialysis treatments and the overdue rent on a decaying 2-bedroom walk-up in Berwyn, just beyond the city line. The clock on the microwave read 4:17 a.m. Elena hadn't slept. She stood at the sink, scrubbing her hands beneath water so hot it bordered on pain. She scrubbed until her knuckles burned and her skin flushed raw, pink and trembling. Still, she couldn't wash away the phantom sensation, the memory of cold metal pressing against her fingertip, the weight of a trigger that had changed everything. "Elena." The voice behind her was faint. Fragile. Barely more than breath. She froze. Slowly, she shut off the tap. Dried her hands on a faded dish towel. Then she turned and crossed into the living room, no longer a living room at all, but a makeshift medical ward. A rented hospital bed dominated the space, surrounded by softly blinking machines and looping coils of plastic tubing. Grandma Evelyn lay awake, her skin thin and yellowed like old paper. "I'm here, Nana," Elena whispered, easing onto the edge of the bed. Evelyn inhaled, then frowned slightly. "You smell like smoke," she murmured. "And expensive cologne." Elena smiled, smooth and practiced. "Long shift. Big spenders." Her grandmother's fingers closed around Elena's hand with surprising strength. "You've got your father's hands," she said quietly. "Steady. Too steady. Be careful, my girl. It's the quiet ones, those are the ones the devil keeps an eye on." Elena stiffened. Evelyn didn't know the truth. Not even close. Because Elena Carter didn't exist. Her real name was Elisabetta Morano, the carefully hidden daughter of a man who once cleaned up crime scenes for whoever paid the most in the late 90s. Her father hadn't taught her how to ride a bike. He'd taught her which solvents pulled blood from tile grout and how to spot a liar by watching the pulse jump in their neck. He'd been murdered when she was 12. A loose end quietly erased. Since then, she'd spent a decade pretending to be invisible. Until Matteo DeLuca saw straight through the lie. The next evening, Elena didn't return to the club. At 6:12 p.m., her burner phone vibrated with a single message. No sender. Just an address. A time. The Langham Hotel, Presidential Suite. 8:30 p.m. Wear black. A box waited outside her apartment door. Inside, a black silk gown, backless and razor sleek. Beneath it, a pair of designer heels that cost more than her car. Elena considered running. She could grab Evelyn. Pack the trunk. Drive until the gas gauge hit empty. But Matteo DeLuca didn't lose things. If she ran, he'd find her. If she went, she might live. The dress fit perfectly. That detail terrified her more than anything else. At 8:30 sharp, a black SUV idled at the curb. The driver, Victor, the scar-faced enforcer from the club, didn't open her door. "Get in." The ride downtown was silent. Victor watched her through the mirror, suspicion burning in his eyes. He knew she'd put a gun to his boss's head, and couldn't fire. Drew out why she was still breathing. At the hotel, they bypassed the lobby. Service elevator. Straight to the top. The suite was a palace of velvet, glass, and muted gold. Matteo stood by the window, city lights spilling over his shoulders. A glass of scotch in one hand. A thin dossier in the other. Elisabetta, he said, without turning. Elena stopped cold. Her pulse thundered, but her expression didn't shift. My name is Elena. Matteo turned slowly. Your name, he said calmly, dropping the dossier onto the table, is whatever I decide it is. The file fell open. Photographs. Her father's body. The apartment where he died. A grainy image of a 12-year-old girl covered in dust and grief. Your father, Matteo said, circling her, was known as the custodian. Best cleaner between Detroit and St. Louis. He could erase a massacre like it never happened. He taught me how to survive, Elena replied. Matteo stopped inches from her. Which is exactly why I'm offering you a job. I don't clean anymore. I don't want you to. He leaned closer. I want your eyes. He explained calmly. A negotiation. A volatile syndicate. Men who watched weapons and missed tells. He needed someone who wouldn't draw attention. Someone observant. Someone dangerous in silence. If something goes wrong, he said, you warn me. If you save my life, your grandmother's debts disappear. Permanently. Elena's breath caught. And if I die, she asked. Matteo smiled. I'll buy you a very nice headstone. He offered his arm. Elena looked at it. At the open file. At the life she could never go back to. For once, she wasn't running. She was choosing. She took his arm. And somewhere in the suite, ice clinked softly in a glass. They called it a charity gala, but everyone in that room knew better. The venue was no longer the Art Institute of Chicago. Tonight, the city's Marble and Glass Harrington Cultural Pavilion had been discreetly rented out for a private fundraiser, the kind that never made the society pages. Officially, the event raised money for children's shelters. Unofficially, it was a rare summit of the city's criminal elite, men whose fortunes had been built on violence, silence, and graves without names. The irony wasn't lost on anyone sharp enough to notice. A string quartet played a soft arrangement of Vivaldi near the atrium, their bows moving in perfect harmony. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished floors. Champagne flutes chimed. Smiles were exchanged. Laughter floated politely through the air. And beneath it all, tension pressed down like a held breath. The room was split with surgical precision. To the left gathered the Marcelli families, old-world suits and tailored confidence, led by Adriano Marcelli himself. On the opposite side stood the Volkov Syndicate, a newer, colder presence, an Eastern European outfit that had been aggressively pushing into the city's southern narcotics routes. Two worlds sharing one room, separated by little more than empty space and mutual hatred. Adriano moved through the crowd with practiced ease, all charm and control, like a predator that didn't need to rush. His smile was warm. His handshakes were firm. But his left hand never left Elena's lower back. It wasn't affectionate. It was directional. A reminder. Relax, he murmured close to her ear, lips barely moving. You look like someone just died. Maybe they will, Elena replied under her breath, eyes already sweeping the room. She slipped into the mindset her father had drilled into her years ago. Detach. Observe. Catalog. The diamonds didn't matter. The designer suits didn't matter. Elena ignored faces and focused on shapes, unnatural bulges beneath jackets, the placement of exits, the spacing between guards. She tracked the waitstaff, memorizing their routes, their timing. Service followed a pattern. Turn. Step. Retreat. Turn. Step. Retreat. That's Mikhail Volkov, Adriano said casually, nodding toward the sculpture gallery. Elin. Followed his gaze. Volkov looked less like a man and more like something carved and animated. Thick neck. Broad shoulders. Hands like bricks wrapped in skin. His tuxedo fit him like a costume forced onto a weapon. His smile was wide, almost friendly, but it never reached his pale, glassy eyes. 4 men flanked him, silent and immovable, their posture screaming professional violence. Adriano. Volkov called out, voice booming loudly enough to cut through the music. You bring sunshine into a room full of wolves. Adriano stepped forward, guiding Elena with him. Mikhail, he said smoothly. This is Elena. Volkov took her hand and pressed his lips to it. Cold. Damp. Lingering. Fearless, he said, studying her like an object. Standing beside a man like this. I like wolves, Elena replied, gently withdrawing her hand. They protect their own. Volkov laughed, but his eyes tightened. Protection has a price. And loyalty? He shrugged. That's the most expensive thing there is. The 2 leaders moved toward a secluded table near the balcony doors, positioning themselves just out of casual earshot. Elena sat beside Adriano and reached for a glass of water. No ice. She never trusted ice. The men spoke in layered metaphors, shipping lanes, labor disputes, supply routes, each sentence carrying teeth beneath the polish. Elena let their voices fade into background noise as she scanned the room again. That's when she noticed the waiter. Young. Blonde. Slightly stiff in his movements. His jaw twitched every few seconds, a tell that screamed nerves. He carried a bottle of expensive red wine, moving toward the Volkov side first. The pour was flawless. Controlled. Professional. Then he turned toward Adriano. Something shifted. The waiter adjusted his grip, index finger sliding down the bottle's neck, subtly covering the label. Elena's brow furrowed. Her gaze dropped to his feet. Every server wore identical polished dress shoes. This one didn't. Matte black soles. Reinforced tray. Add. Tactical boots with the branding crudely blacked out. Traction, Elena realized. He's not leaving slowly. He's leaving fast. The waiter leaned in to refill Adriano's glass. His other hand stayed hidden beneath a folded napkin. It twitched once. Time stretched thin. Adriano was distracted, locked in a cold stare-down with Volkov, trading veiled threats disguised as corporate banter. He never saw the movement. Elena didn't hesitate. She didn't scream. Screaming wasted seconds. She seized the heavy crystal water pitcher from the center of the table and swung with everything she had. The impact was thunderous. Glass exploded. Bone cracked. The waiter's face collapsed under the blow just as he lunged forward. His scream tore through the gallery as the ceramic knife flew from his hand, skidding across the marble floor and coming to rest inches from Volkov's shoes. Blood sprayed across the tablecloth, spattering Adriano's immaculate white shirt. The music died instantly. Silence slammed into the room. Adriano was on his feet in a blink, gun already drawn and aimed straight at Volkov's chest. Around them, bodyguards and lieutenants followed suit. 40 guns appeared in seconds. Set up! Adriano roared. Volkov raised his hand slowly, face drained of color. I didn't order this, he shouted. That man is not mine. The injured attacker writhed on the floor, choking and clutching what was left of his face. Elena stood over him, chest heaving, a jagged shard of the shattered pitcher still clenched in her fist. Adriano's eyes moved, waiter, knife, Elena. Then he noticed the boots. Understanding hit him like a punch. Stand down, Adriano ordered sharply, though his gun never wavered. Check him. One of his men kicked the attacker onto his back and tore open the ruined uniform. Tattooed across the man's chest was a black serpent devouring its own tail. The room collectively inhaled. Ouroboros, Volkov whispered, genuine fear creeping into his voice. The third faction. Adriano's expression hardened. This wasn't a turf dispute anymore. This was something older. Something buried. Something that wasn't supposed to still be alive. He lowered his weapon slowly and turned to Elena. The adrenaline was draining from her now, leaving tremors in its wake. Adriano shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, covering the blood staining her dress. You almost missed her. Sarah's breath caught as she leaned closer. There, she murmured, barely louder than the rain tapping the windows, nodding toward a faint smear of red along his cheek. Adrian lifted his hand without hesitation. His thumb traced the edge of her jaw, brushing away a bead of water, or blood, she couldn't tell anymore. His touch was steady, deliberate. You saved the king tonight, Adrian said quietly, his voice meant for her alone. That makes you a queen, Eliza. His eyes hardened. And queens don't get to step off the board. He turned toward the room, his arms sliding around her waist and pulling her firmly against him. This meeting is finished, he announced, authority snapping through every syllable. We have a war to prepare for. They exited the museum under a canopy of umbrellas and gun barrels. Armed men closed ranks around them, a moving wall of dark suits and controlled violence. As Eliza crossed the threshold, she glanced back. Victor was still standing there. He wasn't staring with anger. He was calculating. In a single night, she had exposed a hidden threat, saved the most powerful man in the city, and proven she was more dangerous than anyone carrying a weapon. The test was done. The game had only just begun. The drive away from the museum dissolved into streaks of rain and flashing sirens. Adrian didn't take Eliza back to her apartment on the west side. He didn't take her to the nightclub either. Instead, a convoy of black SUVs carved an erratic path through the city, doubling back, taking sudden turns, deliberately trying to lose anyone foolish enough to follow. Eventually, they slipped into the underground garage of an unremarkable steel and glass tower downtown. Eliza finally broke the silence. Where are we going? She was still wrapped in Adrian's tuxedo jacket. It smelled faintly of gunpowder and expensive cologne, an unsettling combination she was starting to associate with survival. The bunker, Adrian replied. My penthouse is compromised. If they got a waiter into that gala, they can get a courier into my building. His jaw tightened. Tonight, we disappear. The apartment on the 40th floor was stark and cold. Bulletproof windows. Reinforced doors. A dedicated server room humming softly in the background. It wasn't a home, it was a command center. Adrian dismissed most of his men at the door, leaving only Luca stationed in the hall. When the heavy steel door finally sealed shut, the adrenaline drained from the air, replaced by a thick, bone-deep silence. Adrian poured 2 generous drinks at the kitchen island. His hands trembled slightly. Not fear, Eliza realized. Rage. Oryx Boros, he muttered, sliding a glass toward her. They were supposed to be a myth. A ghost story. Old-timers claimed they were wiped out decades ago. My father mentioned them once, Eliza said carefully, memories surfacing through years of dust and denial. Adrian froze. The janitor, he asked slowly. What did he say? He said they weren't a family, she replied. They were a system. Brokers. They didn't run drugs or territory. They sold betrayal. If you wanted a boss eliminated, you hired them. If you wanted an entire operation erased, you hired them. She swallowed. No loyalty. Only contracts. Adrian slammed his palm against the marble. The assassin had a phone, he said. Military-grade encryption. Biometric lock. Luca pulled it off the body, but no one can crack it. Give it to me. He stared at her. Eliza, this isn't mixing drinks. I know, she said evenly. I have a life you don't see. I know Python. Encryption protocols. My father didn't just teach me how to clean blood, he taught me how to erase data. A long pause passed between them. Something shifted. She wasn't an employee anymore. She was a player. Adrian slid the cracked phone across the counter. 1 hour, he said. Then I call in specialists. She didn't need an hour. 40 minutes later, she bypassed the biometric lock by forcing recovery mode and running a brute force script against the pin backup. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Done, she said. Adrian was beside her instantly. What did you find? It's a hit order, she said, scrolling through the decrypted messages. But it didn't come from outside. Her blood went cold. She turned the screen toward him. Target, Adrian Moretti. Location, Museum Gala. Payment confirmed. That's standard, Adrian said. What am I missing? The timestamp, Eliza replied. Sent 10 minutes after we arrived. And the attachment. It was a photo. A clear image of them entering the building. Taken from inside. The call came from inside, she whispered. Someone close to you confirmed your location. Adrian's expression changed, slowly, terrifyingly. The polished executive vanished, replaced by the predator who ruled the city. Who knew about the gala? He asked. You, Eliza said quietly. Me. Luca. And Silvio, Adrian finished. The man who raised him. The man who served his father. The man he trusted above all others. Impossible. Except the data didn't lie. Adrian made the call, his voice light, cheerful, deadly calm. Silvio. The gala was a mess. Meet me at the warehouse in Sector 4. Alone. We need to plan our response. He ended the call and turned to her. You're staying here. No, Eliza said, standing. I found the traitor. I'm coming. It's too dangerous. You said I passed, she challenged, stepping closer. You said I was a queen. You don't lock the queen away when the board turns hostile. Adrian studied her, really studied her. Then his hand cupping the back of her neck, thumb resting over her pulse. Electricity snapped between them, raw and volatile. If you come, he said quietly, there's no turning back. Her eyes never left his. I already crossed the line. The trap was set. Come with me, he murmured, his voice low and final. There's no going back to the cafe, Eliza. After tonight, your blood. Romano blood. You belong to me. Eliza didn't hesitate. She didn't step back. I was never just a server, Matteo, she said quietly. He kissed her then, not gently, not lovingly. It was sharp, decisive. A mark. A binding oath sealed in breath and teeth. Get your jacket, he said as he pulled away. We have a betrayer to deal with. The warehouse on the edge of Sector 9 loomed like a rusted corpse, all iron ribs and warped steel panels left behind by a forgotten manufacturing era. Rain slammed against the roof in relentless sheets, the sound so loud it swallowed every footstep, every whispered command. Matteo and Eliza crouched on a narrow catwalk nearly 20 feet above the concrete floor, swallowed by darkness. Below them, Renzo and 4 loyal men waited behind stacks of shipping crates, weapons ready, bodies tense. At 1:47 a.m., a single sedan rolled into the loading bay. Its headlights sliced through the gloom, catching dust swirling lazily in the air. The engine shut off. A door opened. A man stepped out slowly. Victor Romano leaned heavily on a cane, wrapped in a perfectly pressed tan overcoat. His hair was white, his posture stooped. He looked like someone's harmless grandfather, frail, breakable, almost pitiful. He made his way to the center of the warehouse and stopped. Matteo, he called. I'm here. Matteo emerged onto the catwalk, rainwater dripping from his suit jacket, his silhouette towering above. Good evening, Uncle. Victor squinted upward. Why all this drama? Come down here. We have business to discuss. Oh, we do, Matteo replied evenly. I want to discuss the gallery in. Sit in. I want to discuss how a hired shooter knew exactly where I'd be standing. Victor paused, leaning on his cane. I warned you. We have leaks. Too many mouths. This isn't a leak, Matteo said. It's a river. And it flows straight from your phone. Matteo gave a subtle signal. Renzo's men rose from cover, guns snapping up in unison. Victor didn't scream. He didn't plead. He simply exhaled, long, weary, disappointed. Then he straightened. The cane clattered across the floor. The weakness vanished. I told your father you were soft, Victor said, his voice hardening, losing every trace of warmth. You mistake loyalty for strength. It's not. It's a chain. Why? Matteo demanded. You raised me. And you grew obsolete, Victor spat. These families are rotting. Tradition, borders, pride, it's dead weight. Helix Syndicate is the future. Corporate crime. Clean hands. Endless money. They offered me the city. Matteo's jaw tightened. And I was in the way. You were history. Victor snapped his fingers. Eliza felt it instantly, a pressure shift, like the air itself had flinched. Her eyes flew to the crates near Renzo. Matteo, she screamed. The containers. Too late. The crates exploded open. Men in black tactical gear poured out, mercenaries, precise and ruthless. Not family. Not street soldiers. Helix kill teams. Gunfire detonated instantly. 2 of Matteo's men fell before they could even fire. Renzo overturned a steel table, shouting orders, returning fire with both pistols as bullets shredded the warehouse. Down. Matteo shouted, slamming Eliza to the catwalk as sparks burst from the railing where she'd stood moments before. We're boxed in. Eliza yelled. The roof. Matteo shouted back. Fire ladder, move. They ran, boots hammering the grating as rounds ricocheted beneath them. Below, chaos ruled. Victor walked calmly through the firefight, shielded by mercenaries, heading for the bay exit like a man strolling through rain. Matteo stopped. He looked down at Victor. At the exit. At Renzo, bleeding, pinned, refusing to fall. Go, Matteo ordered, shoving Eliza toward the ladder. Get to the car. I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving them. He vaulted over the railing. 20 feet down. He hit hard, rolled, came up firing, dropping 2 mercenaries flanking Renzo. Boss! Renzo shouted, clutching his shoulder. Move! Matteo roared, emptying his pistol, reloading with brutal efficiency. At the top of the ladder, Eliza froze. The woman she pretended to be would run. But Eliza Romano didn't. She saw Victor nearing the bay doors. If he escaped, this never ended. Her gaze locked onto the old crane control booth. An industrial magnet system. She sprinted. The panel was rusted, labels worn to ghosts. She didn't need them. She slammed the lever. The crane groaned awake, metal shrieking as the massive electromagnet swung over the exit. Victor stepped into the rain. Eliza hit the magnet switch. Nothing. Power dead. Come on, she whispered, slamming the emergency override. A mercenary spotted her. Target above. Gunfire shredded the booth. Glass exploded inward. Eliza ducked, blindly slamming her fist down. Release. The 2-ton hook block detached. It didn't strike Victor. But it obliterated the concrete in front of his car, crushing the engine and blasting debris through the bay. Victor was thrown hard onto his back. The mercenaries hesitated. That was enough. Push! Matteo roared. They advanced, gunfire cutting through men now scrambling with no exit. Matteo reached Victor, looming over him, soaked, bleeding, breathing fire. He aimed. The future's off the table, Matteo said. Do it, Victor rasped. Cut one head, another rises. Mateo didn't blink. The gunfire finally died out. What followed was a suffocating quiet. The vast warehouse fell still, the silence broken only by the distant groans of the injured and the heavy, relentless drumming of rain against the corrugated roof. Smoke lingered in the air, sharp and metallic, stinging the back of the throat. Adrian Moretti lifted his head slowly. His eyes snapped to the overhead catwalk. The glass of the control booth was shattered, the metal frame chewed apart by bullets. Panic surged through him like electricity. "Elena," he shouted, his voice cracking in a way it never had before. "Elena." No answer. Fear took over. Adrian bolted forward, boots skidding on wet concrete as he reached the ladder. He climbed fast, too fast, ignoring the burn in his lungs and the scream of protest from his muscles. He hit the top, kicked the door open, and stumbled inside the booth. Elena was on the floor. She was slumped against the control console, her breathing shallow, her skin drained of color. One trembling hand pressed against her side. Dark blood seeped through the midnight blue silk of the dress he had bought her only hours earlier. Did we make it?" she whispered. Her voice was barely there. Adrian dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering uselessly in the air. He was terrified to touch her, terrified of making it worse, terrified of what he already knew. "We did," he said hoarsely. "It's over. We won." He forced the words out, then shouted over his shoulder, his voice raw with desperation. "Leo! Bring the car. Now!" Elena smiled. It was faint, fragile, but real. "So," she murmured weakly, "guess I finally flinched." Her eyes rolled back. Her body went slack against his chest. The scream that tore out of Adrian Moretti echoed through the warehouse, a sound stripped of power, stripped of control, nothing but pure, unfiltered terror. The man who had built his empire on fear and precision held her like she was the only thing left in the world. He had won the battle. But the war that mattered had just begun. For 48 endless hours, the only sound that existed was the steady, mechanical beep of a cardiac monitor. It counted time with ruthless indifference, each pulse a reminder of how close life and death truly were. Adrian sat in a rigid plastic chair in the corner of the intensive care unit at Mercy Cross Medical Center. He barely looked human anymore. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He was still wearing the same tailored shirt from the warehouse, now stiff with dried blood and grime, the cuffs rolled back to his elbows. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw. His eyes were red, hollow, burning with an exhaustion he refused to acknowledge. The hospital staff were terrified of him. On the first night, a charge nurse had attempted to enforce visiting hours. She never even reached Adrian. Leo had intercepted her calmly, explaining to the administrator that Mr. Moretti had personally financed the hospital's new trauma wing 4 years earlier, and that forcing him to leave might result in unfortunate complications involving funding and power. No one challenged him again. Adrian held Elena's hand. Her skin was frighteningly pale under the harsh fluorescent lights, almost translucent. Deep bruising bloomed violently along her side. 4 lines threaded into her arm, feeding fluids and antibiotics into her system as machines breathed for her. He squeezed her fingers gently, watching her chest rise and fall in shallow, assisted breaths. "You don't get to die," he whispered, his voice raw, ruined by smoke and screaming and sleepless nights. "I didn't hire you to die. That wasn't part of the deal." It sounded like an order. But in the quiet of the room, it was nothing more than a prayer to a God he claimed not to believe in. Her eyes finally opened at 2:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. The exact time she used to clock out of her shift at Eclipse Lounge, back when her biggest concerns were sore feet and an angry floor manager. She blinked rapidly, disoriented, adjusting to the light. A sharp groan escaped her as she tried to move, pain flaring where stitches held her together. Adrian was at her side instantly. "Elena." She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were glassy, heavy with medication, but they found him. Her phi. Fingers tightened weakly around his. That small pressure felt stronger than steel. "You look awful," she rasped. The sound Adrian made was halfway between a laugh and a sob. He pressed her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles as the mask he'd worn for decades finally cracked. "You jumped in front of a firing squad," he said quietly. "You took a bullet meant for me." She frowned faintly. "I was aiming for the crane controls," she murmured. "Panicked, I guess. Bad angle." Her lips twitched. "You're welcome." He brushed damp hair from her forehead, his touch uncharacteristically gentle. "Why?" he asked. "You could have run." "You should have." Elena stared at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. The drugs were dragging her under, but she fought them long enough to answer. "Because," she whispered, eyelids drooping, "I don't like unfinished work." Her grip loosened as sleep claimed her again. 3 months later, the skyline of Lakeport was wrapped in winter fog, the city lights burning defiantly through the mist. Eclipse Lounge was gone. The sign had been stripped away. The velvet ropes removed. In its place stood something entirely new. Above reinforced steel doors, a single word glowed softly. The Vault. It wasn't just a nightclub anymore. It was a fortress, exclusive, fortified, impossible to enter without clearance, scans, and a name on the list. A nerve center of power and influence. The doors opened. Elena stepped inside. She wasn't wearing an apron anymore. She wore a sharply tailored ivory power suit, cut with surgical precision. Her hair, once shoved into a messy bun, was now a sleek, confident bob. A diamond necklace caught the light at her throat, a gift from Adrian. She walked forward without hesitation. The job wasn't unfinished anymore. She owned it. It wasn't just jewelry. The piece resting against her collarbone was a statement, a quiet, undeniable announcement to the entire city. It said she belonged to the DeLuca crown now, and more importantly, that the crown answered to her. The club breathed around her, thick with low jazz, murmured deals, and the soft clink of expensive glasses. Power lived in places like this, not loud, not flashy, just patient. Elena moved past the bar with unhurried precision, her heels tapping against the polished stone like punctuation marks. Every step carried intent. Every step reminded the room who was in control. Behind the counter, the new bartender, a nervous kid named Mateo, stiffened when he saw her coming. He couldn't have been more than 22. Too young. Too earnest. Something about him tugged at an old memory she didn't linger on. He adjusted his vest, swallowed, and dipped his head. "Good evening, Mrs. DeLuca." Elena stopped, resting 2 manicured fingers against the dark walnut bar. "Evening, Mateo," she said calmly. "The meeting's already underway." "Yes, ma'am." "They're expecting you." "Good." She leaned in just enough for him to smell her perfume, subtle, expensive, deliberate. "Send the water in," she added softly. 3 ice cubes. No more. No less. "Don't forget." His nod was immediate. Absolute. Never. She turned away before the memory behind that word could surface. The hallway leading to the back office used to scare her. Once, it felt like a tunnel leading to judgment. To endings. Tonight, she walked it without hesitation. She didn't knock. Inside, Victor DeLuca stood behind a massive obsidian desk, the glow of a tablet washing over his face. Financial reports scrolled beneath his fingers. He looked different now, healthier. Sharper. The strain that once lived under his eyes was gone, replaced by something colder. More dangerous. When Elena entered, he didn't just glance up. He stood. "Nana Rosa?" he asked instantly. "She's settled at the estate," Elena replied, crossing the room toward the crystal decanter. "Just spoke with the head nurse. Apparently the mountain air is offensive, and the staff smiles too much. She misses the rattle of the subway, outside her old apartment." Victor smiled faintly. "We can bring her back." I'll have the penthouse reinforced. Triple insulation. Elena poured herself a drink, unbothered. No. She's safer there. And we're safer with her away. She turned, meeting his eyes. That's the balance. She sat on the edge of his desk, crossing her legs with effortless authority, and lifted the ledger he'd been studying. The Auro Syndicate accounts, Victor said. Gone. He leaned back as he spoke, calm and measured. While you were healing, Luca and I dismantled everything. We traced their financier through a dummy firm in Tampa. Followed the wire transfers. Froze the offshore reserves in Aruba. His eyes hardened. We didn't strike them directly. We cut off the oxygen. Elena nodded once. Satisfied. The third faction doesn't exist anymore. She reached up and adjusted his tie, her fingers lingering just long enough to remind him who was standing in front of him. People are talking, she murmured. Whispers on the street. They say Victor DeLuca lost his edge. That he weakened after marrying a diner girl. Victor laughed quietly and stepped forward, positioning himself between her knees. His hand settled at her waist, grounding, familiar. Dangerous. Let them talk, he whispered near her ear. Let them believe it. And what are they wrong about? She asked. His eyes locked onto hers. They don't know the waitress is the one who pulls the trigger. He kissed her, slow, deliberate, unafraid. Not the kiss of infatuation, but of two survivors who had seen the same darkness and chosen to rule within it. When he pulled back, he checked his watch. They're ready, he said. The council's waiting. All 5 families want to meet the new consigliere. Elena smiled, the same steady, unshaken smile she'd worn months ago with a loaded pistol pressed to his temple. Let's not keep them thirsty, she said, sliding off the desk and straightening her jacket. She took his arm. He didn't lead. There did she. Together, they walked past the guards, through the corridors of influence, and into the center of their empire. The woman who once stood still under pressure had become the one everyone else bent for. And Victor DeLuca, the man rumored to have ice where his heart should be, had finally found the one equation he couldn't solve, and the only one worth bleeding for. That's how a 24-year-old server brought the most feared man in the city to his knees. Not with bullets. With nerve. Elena didn't just survive the underworld. She mastered it. Because the most powerful person in any room isn't always the loudest. Or the one holding the weapon. It's the one who stays calm when everything is burning. So let me ask you, if you were standing there with a gun aimed at your head and $10,000 on the table, would you pull the trigger? Or would you walk away? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story of power, loyalty, and quiet domination, hit that like button, it helps more than you know. Subscribe for more stories like this, ring the bell so you don't miss the next one, and I'll see you in the next video.